Alright, so this video is for Dystopian Wars version 3.04. This is for people just starting to get into the game or people that are interested in getting into the game. Dystopian Wars is a miniatures war game that uses ship miniatures, and it takes place as an alternate history in Earth in the late 1800s. This video was created during version 3.04, and the intention is to update this when new major changes happen. If you're playing something like 4 point something something and it's years later, some of these tips or statements probably won't apply anymore. So let's get started. So just to start out, we have an outline about what I'm going to go over in this video. So we're going to check out the dice math, some gameplay concepts based on my experience and the way the rules and the stats lay out, resources for starting out playing the game, how to evaluate ships, basics of different ship types, good starter game to play to learn. I'm going to go over some negative play experiences that I've run into and some things to do to handle those. Some advice on crafting and just doing your own stuff to make the gameplay go a little bit smoother or be a little more interesting. And I just want to have a little note on Wild West Exodus and how it relates to this game. So we're going to start out with how do the dice work? So right underneath me on the right hand side, you can see the gray dice. Those are the basic action dice used in the game. There's one blank face, two blue faces, one with one shield, one with two, and three red dice. One with one hit, one with two, and one with a Dystopian Wars symbol. The red dice represent hits. The blue dice represent counters, which are good for defense. The blank represents nothing. So essentially what the math works out to is you should get one hit for every die you throw. So if you throw 10 dice, you should expect to see 10 hits. The Dystopian Wars symbol dice counts for 2 hits, and you get to roll another die afterward. So generally speaking, you can expect a decent number of hits, and they can be relatively consistent even without additional rules. Now, this kind of rule of thumb for, one hit for every die you throw, that can change dramatically based on different rules. So certain rules will make it so that the heavy hit dice, which has 2 hits on it, only counts as 1. Or there will be things that make it so your exploding die doesn't explode. Those are pretty common. Or sometimes there are other bonuses that can just really increase the amount of hits you get. So Fusillade, for example, if you're within a close enough range against a specific target, you can reroll your shields, and that'll yield a lot more hits than just the dice pool that you threw. So sometimes you'll look at a weapon and you'll say, why are the dice so low on this weapon? Why is this any good? And you see, oh, well, it's got a rule that makes it so that those small amount of dice actually do a lot of hits. Generally speaking, the majority of units in this game have an armor value of 6. So you want your dice pools to give you multiples of 6. A 12 will generally yield a critical hit roll on a ship. A 24 will not only do, potentially 4 damage from beating the ship's armor 4 times, but give you a catastrophic explosion and a crit roll, which is an additional 2 damage. You want to deal usually 4 damage to a cruiser. So that means that maybe hitting a cruiser with 2 dice pools of 12 or one pool of 24 will be good to cripple it. All right. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking through weapons and you're trying to figure out what they can do and what ranges you want and how they stack up. Because you may find actually that a regular gun battery and a heavy gun battery on their own are perfectly fine to deal a decent number of hits to a cruiser. Now, the defense dice are almost half the dice you roll. This is not consistent because you don't have an exploding defense. There's no rules that I've run into that dramatically change this. The only thing that comes close is there's a defense card that will make it so that the exploding hit counts as a heavy counter, the double shield. But even that doesn't change the numbers too much. Really, if the person can reroll, that will yield them a lot more shields for their defense roll. But that's kind of the only real option. So these gameplay concepts are ones that I've noticed, and I think it's good to keep in mind for when you move forward in this game. So you can't really table your opponent on turn 1 or 2. This is not like a 40k type game or other sci-fi games where it's like if you can see it, it's dead. It can be, but if you're playing with enough terrain and you should be fine. But at the same time, it's kind of limited. Like, let's say you're playing on a completely open table. Your opponent should not be able to table you round 1. It just shouldn't be possible. 1, this is an alternate activation game, and 2, the ranges are relatively limited. Not that much has an extreme range weapon, which is 40 inches. So outside of the extreme weapons, the max range is 30 inches, and normally nothing is within 30 inches turn 1. Generally, everything's balanced that I've seen so far, and the developers are actively pursuing game balance and changing things. For example, when I started playing, SRS was pretty repressive. It was pretty rough. And the way they handled it, I thought was very good. SRS are still good right now, and they're still strong, but they changed the rules for magnetic generators, so magnetic generators are real rough on SRS. If somebody goes nothing but SRS, they just go 4 super carriers and some support ships. You can really punish them with just a couple of magnetic generators, which I like. But if somebody takes a balanced list, well, you can maybe heavily punish their SRS, but now suddenly you're missing weapons to deal with the rest of their battle fleet, and that's the way it should be. This is an alternate activation game, and it's not that vulnerable to activation scumming. So if you've played other alternating activation games, you will know that most games are extraordinarily vulnerable to activation skimming, which is, let's take Battletech for an example, right? Savannah Masters costs me like 50 points. So I can take 10 Savannah Masters very easily. And that means that my opponent basically doesn't get to play the game. He moves one of his mechs, I move a Savannah Master. He moves his other mech, I move a Savannah Master. He moves his last mech, I move a Savannah Master. Now I can do whatever I want with my mechs. He either has to intentionally get into my range, because he has to do something, right? He can sit in the back and I can slowly approach him, but even then I'm controlling the engagement, and I can get in range when I want to. Or, he's basically just not playing. I'm reacting to everything he does, and I can move in such a way as to make it so he can't really do anything to me. This game isn't really vulnerable to that, and I think it's largely because the number of units you have is very limited based on battle fleets. And if you want to try and spam battle fleets, you have to pay a flagship tax. And those flagships are pretty expensive, and they're going to heavily limit how many units you can ultimately take. So I think that's good. However, round 2 or 3, a player with more activations. Oh, the other thing that's kind of makes it less vulnerable is round 1, generally nothing's in a very optimal position to shoot. There's definitely some extreme range stuff, artillery ships and things, or people with missiles, Union with missiles, that can start doing some turn 1 damage. But generally, it's not until round 2 or 3 people are really coming to grips with each other. So I find around round 2 or 3, if somebody really has an activation advantage, or let's say you guys are even and a unit gets destroyed or is essentially combat ineffective, the player with more activations can start snowballing and getting stronger and stronger and stronger as they can just start picking and choosing the engagement and really controlling, okay, I'm going to finish off that unit, or I'm not going to let this unit get into range of anything, and you're just going to have to activate it and shoot at a bad range band for it. That has reduced. The snowballing has declined as our players have gotten more experienced, but it is something I've noticed, and that's just how alternating activation games can be. I actually think of the alternating activation games, this is a good one. Even if this is a weakness, like a true weakness and not just my group, I don't consider it nearly as bad as most of the other alternating activation games out there. Alternating activation is normally just too easy to abuse. And then the real rough part is some players just like a lot of infantry and tanks, and they suddenly become the monster of the gaming club because they're unintentionally ruining the system, um, which I have seen in real life. And then the other thing I was going to say is units have different roles. In my experience, on paper, stacking one type of unit and just spamming it looks very powerful. That's kind of the 40k way. I don't think it's very good in this system. Different ships require different answers, and sometimes the answers to those ships are so good, you're going to be in big trouble if that's all you take. So if you take a bunch of mass ones and I have a bunch of blast, you're going to be in trouble. Even if you try to spread them out, if you have a lot of mass ones, there's just not enough board space to spread out a completely spammed army. You're going to start getting multiple ships under that template. And then let's say, like I say, SRS spam. If I have a couple magnetic generators, you're going to have a real hard time. So that's a good thing. But like I say, don't build an army to table your opponent. Bullet point that's missing here as well is play the objectives. You get very, very, very few points from killing ships. You get a lot of points from doing objectives and cards. But we're not going to go over cards right now. So don't build an army to table your opponent. Make sure you've got, well, a fleet that can accomplish objectives, which is generally just moving somewhere. That's usually what the objectives are, is move somewhere. Don't try to break the system. It's actually pretty resilient. But at the same time, don't screw yourself over by intentionally taking no activations, right? Don't just take 2 big juggernauts and then be surprised when your opponent's just dancing all over you. You know, you move those juggernauts forward, you can't shoot anything, your turn's over, and then the opponent just activates 8 units all at once and blows them out of the water. Okay, resources. So I'm kind of assuming you've read through the rules. You might want to watch this again, but just real quickly, the best way to start is just to Google Dystopian Wars, or Bing, of course. Go to dystopianwars.com. go to the Resources tab at the top of the page, and then download the current rules, the current FAQ, and I would also suggest getting the generator guide. It's kind of hard to find. You might have to look in that page a little bit. It's got artwork of a Covenant ship on it. That's just going to help you later on trying to figure out what the heck all the generators are that come on your sprues when you do buy the miniatures. The FAQ is very helpful. It illuminates a lot. And as long as you get the current rules, I find you don't really need the errata because it's basically all digital anyway, right? So the rules will be updated. And then the next thing you need is your army book, your codex, your Orbat. That's your order of battle. You just click on the factions tab, and then you click on the factions you're interested in, and you download those. Okay, so and that brings us into how to evaluate ships, because for me, when I first started, and I hadn't actually got any games, that Orbat was like reading Chinese to me. I just didn't know my left from my right. It took me a long time to get comfortable with what I was looking at. So I'm going to try to help you here. So let's look at this fake cruiser. Let's look at his stats. This is basically what I think is the average stats of a cruiser in this game. I've looked at all the cruisers, and this appears to be the baseline. This is the average. Anything above these numbers is good. Anything below these numbers is subpar. You'll just see real quick that each cruiser has a ready value and a crippled value. H is your hull points or hit points. You have, at least the mythic cruiser has 4 ready hull points and 4 crippled hull points. As soon as this 4 hull points gets to 0, meaning it took 4 damage, it goes and uses the crippled profile for everything. You'll see some of these numbers are lower. That's normal. Now let's look at some of these numbers. So this fake cruiser is mass 2, just means it's a mass 2 ship. Speed 7, turn limit 4, armor 6, that's how many hits it needs before it takes a damage. Citadel 12, that's how many hits it needs in one attack before it takes a critical damage roll. And if you double this number, it takes an extra 2 damage. Air defense value, sub defense value, this is for aerial attacks, this is for submerged attacks. Fray, that's for close combat. And hull. Now, what I want you to do is go ahead and go to the Wayland Games for the faction you're most interested in. Don't look at the Orbat, go to the web store and look at the frontline box. So if I'm interested in Union, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to click on the Union frontline box, and I'm going to read what cruisers I can make from that. Generally, it's going to be a light cruiser, a regular cruiser, a heavy cruiser, and a monitor. Okay, so for the Union, I can make an Intrepid light cruiser, a Yorktown cruiser, a Lexington heavy cruiser, and a Reliant monitor. All right. Generally speaking, the light cruisers, almost standard through all the factions, will have 1 heavy gun and 1 light gun, and they'll be a bit faster. The cruisers will have 2 heavy guns. The heavy cruisers will have 2 heavy guns and a light gun, and they usually have heavy armor or more hull points. And then the monitors are kind of a special case. They'll have 1 heavy gun. Sometimes they have worse stats than the other ships. Sometimes they have weird stats, like a really high fray or something else. Monitors are kind of special application. I would consider them kind of scoring chaff or just some other special application, generator carrier or something. But what I want you to do is figure out what your frontline box makes and just evaluate those 4 ships. Find those profiles in your Orbat and compare them to each other. And compare them to these fake cruiser stats. Okay? And then you'll be able to see, oh, This has a better armor. The Lexington has armor 7. That means it's significantly tougher than most cruisers in the game, and it's the toughest cruiser I've got. And you'll notice, oh my gosh, the Yorktown, my regular cruiser is Union, has a speed of 7, or a speed of 8. It's faster than most cruisers, and it's faster than my other cruisers except for the Intrepid, which is my light cruiser. And that'll help you to start comparing the ships with each other. Now, the support box normally makes special applications ships. These ships, in my experience, don't really compare directly to each other. You have to see what is it that they provide and do I want it. So a Washington missile cruiser fires cruise missiles that have a blast template. I find one missile cruiser is nice to have in case people have a lot of Mass 1 ships because I can just use that blast template either to restrict their movement. Suddenly now they've got to either spread out and it's going to be more awkward to get them moving around, or if they bunch him up and I get a good shot with the Washington, I'm going to make them combat ineffective potentially in one shot. I've got a Roanoke, which will provide SRS, which are fighter planes. And I've got Discovery Arc Cruiser, which I don't think very much of. But and then I've got a couple of supply. I have a supply ship and a repair ship as well. But they're all special applications. They don't really apply. You have to say, is this a capability I want? Is this a capability I need? I would honestly just start with frontline and then ask yourself, and then be aware of what the support ships say they can do. And then just ask yourself during a game, do I want that ship? What do I wish I had a Washington here? I'd have to trade, a Lexington and a half for it, but would I rather have that? And then the other thing to kind of keep in mind for ship evaluation is SRS carriers, okay? Those are your aircraft carriers. They tend to be fragile. So for your carrier, try to look at the battle-ready hull. How much battle-ready hull do you have? And what is your crippled SRS capacity? And do you have anything special your SRS do? Do you have anything special that your hull does? And what this is important for is you'll find sometimes, so a lot of carriers only have a battle-ready hull of 3. And they'll have a lot of fighters at battle ready and no fighters almost at crippled. Well, if you look at like an Empire, Hokkaido, or Miyagi, their SRS capacity is 2 and 2, and those are generally fighting ships, so they don't have the vulnerabilities of regular cruisers. One thing to keep in mind is it doesn't matter if they get crippled, right? Your Hokkaido, if you're going to bring a Hokkaido, don't leave it in the back. Just use it as a line ship. As long as it's got one hull point, it's at 100% SRS capacity. Another one to think about is the Italians tend to have tough ships. Their Jupiter cruiser, its crippled value for SRS is 3. Its battle ready is 4. Even when that ship gets crippled, it's still throwing out most of its SRS. So, keep that in mind when you evaluate carriers. You'll find they tend to be a lot of points. And if you have a carrier that is a lot of points and has like 3 battle ready hull points and its crippled value for SRS is 2, be very careful with them, right? Nothing about that's special, nothing about that's tough. Okay, so basics of different ship types. So flagships, I want you to keep this in mind because I feel like everybody I know gets really confused in those. Flagships, generally speaking, are a detachment tax. Okay, the other function that they fill pretty well is they can be very tanky and very tough to kill. or they can have some other special application. Okay, um, like a generator ship or a super carrier with a whole lot of SRS on it, or they can have an ability called Fortunes of War, which, if you're playing competitively, I think is invaluable. It gives you the ability to cancel other people's valor effects, which tend to be very powerful and are usually very important to cancel. Um, they are seldom the best source of damage. I caution you, unless you're playing a faction that has carriers that do a lot of damage, or you're dealing with super carriers and the damage is coming from the SRS. Do not take a flagship thinking it's going to do damage. A unit of carriers or a unit of cruisers is often cheaper and just has more raw guns and is a little less. Um, the Usually the well armed flagships are low armored or they're extraordinarily expensive, and a unit of cruisers is oftentimes even tougher, um, or they protect their firepower a little better. So don't look at flagships as DPS unless you see a very special ship in your Orbat that clearly is some kind of a crazy, 6 heavy gun, heavy fire, but they don't, as far as I know, they're not out there. Um, I think that Descartes, it's a type of carrier ship, but their whales can do some pretty good damage. Um, cruisers tend to be the best mix of everything seen in the game. Generally, cruisers are relatively fast. Flagships can be as fast as a cruiser. You got to remember when you look at the speed of a ship, and I should have said this under ship evaluation, add the S value to the M value. That's how fast the ship really goes. So a mass 3 ship with speed 7 actually moves 10 inches a turn. A mass 2 ship with speed 7 actually only moves 9 inches a turn. You would think that the cruiser would move faster because it's got a higher speed. No, actually, due to drift, that flagship with speed 7 would move faster. So, but still, cruisers tend to be the best mix. They also tend to be the best source of damage, and they usually, since they have heavy guns, they have very versatile range bands, and they tend to be relatively maneuverable. Now, mass ones, they can have serious amounts of damage. Destroyers have 2 light guns, and when you're looking at a 6 unit destroyer group, they're not that expensive, and you've got essentially 12 guns in there. They can put out the damage, but the light versions of the guns usually have some terrible limitations. Either they have very short range, or they have bad support values, or something like that. So they're a little more limited in how their damage goes out. Sometimes they'll have to get closer, but they can do something. You also can't really take them out with big hits. You waste dice on killing mass 1 ships. So they can be very nice, and they tend to be very maneuverable. So cruisers, you remember, they're sitting there on like turn limit 4. They can make 4 turns, maybe 5 if it's a very maneuverable one. Mass ones are literally on turn limit 7, turn limit 8. They can turn all over the place. They're very maneuverable, good for scoring. So this is a good note. I play Union. I don't really understand subs very well. They're obscured most of the time. They're usually weaker defensive to make up for the fact that they're obscured. But, torpedoes, which most ships have, ignore that. And you can hit subs with gunnery and missiles and stuff. Actually, I think aerial might not be able to. I could be wrong. It feels stupid now, but most weapons can hit subs. You lose your exploding hits most of the time, but I find even then the subs don't, they're not like tanky most of the time. I can't really evaluate subs very well because, like I say, when I see them, I just destroy them or they don't do anything. And I don't play them. Air is interesting. So there's two capabilities that air have that are very, very important. First off, nothing blocks their line of sight except aerial terrain, and as far as I know, there's no aerial terrain in the game yet. I guess you could make some, but I don't have any, and I've never seen it played with, so generally air gets to see everything. And two, you have a worse range band when shooting at air, so it's kind of kind of a defensive buff. Long range is still long for them, so that doesn't do anything. But you can never get into point blank range. That's bad for gun batteries, right? It does not help the aerial unit for gun batteries necessarily because if that gun battery ship is close enough, then they're at the perfect range band to hurt them. Gun batteries like closing range. That's the medium range. And I tend to find, and they ignore terrain. They can fly over ships, fly over terrain. I tend to find that they're significantly overcosted. Significantly overcosted, like 80 points more expensive than they probably ought to be. That's just a number I'm throwing out there. I don't know that it's true, but I find you can just get more with surface ships, and they tend to be tougher. And the other disadvantage of air is even though you can see everything on the table, everybody can see you too. Um, and since airships tend to be very fragile, it's a bad combination. I think the German air does okay, I guess, but most of the airships I see, those missiles when they don't have a target, the only target they got on the table is those airships. Guess what? It's it's not a good day for air. Um, there is like deep striking in this game and strategic reserves. Um, but I find it sometimes extremely limiting, and I prefer not to use it if I can get away with it. It's so difficult to use. Um, Next up is skimmers. Skimmers have increased cost, but skimmers are allowed to ignore terrain, and if they're sitting on terrain, they can see through it. I kind of think that they have like the best values of. They're a very good mix of air and surface units. I like skimmers a bit better. I don't find them to be too expensive to take, and the advantages can be very helpful when they're available. But like I say, even though I'm bashing on air units, if you have a specialized application for the air unit, definitely take it. Like there may be a role for a Union Ticonderogas, for example. They're a fast unit that has kind of an assault token that's 20 inches. Everything else with those tokens is extremely slow. So their speed may make them worth paying the points, but they are very, very expensive. So this is my suggestion for a good starter game. Do not worry about points. Do not play with cards. Just run a battleship, a unit of heavy cruisers, just 3 heavy cruisers, a unit of light cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and a unit of frigates. I'd say 4 frigates, but you can go 6. I would not do 2. Don't play with cards again for your first game, maybe even your first 2 games. Just roll for initiative for first turn, and then alternate who gets to activate first for your game rounds. Believe me, it'll cut some of the complication out of the game. I don't think it'll make you learn the game wrong. Um, and then you'll be it's just much cleaner. I've had much more success with people learning without cards their first game. My suggestion is to play the rule the waves scenario until you're comfortable with the game. But every time, play rule the waves. And the reason why is when you're learning a new game, I suggest you play as many games as you can. Even if you just have an hour before bed, even if you just have an hour while your kids are at nap, start up that game. Even if you don't even finish round one, you've at least gotten the rules in your head a little bit. You've gotten to move the miniatures around, and you're going to be faster when you have more time to play a full game. What I like about Rule the Waves is first off, it's going to put in your head, I need to be doing an objective. The objective of Rule the Waves is to get one of your units into an enemy table quarter. And you score points at the end of the round if you've got a unit in the enemy table quarter. So if you only play 2 rounds of a game, you're still scoring victory points. You can still see the value of the victory points. And it's kind of typical of all the scenarios in the game right now, which is move your ships somewhere and score points. So it's just good to keep your head in the game, because one of the things we did, I think, was a big misstep in my group, was we started out without objectives, and then people just got obsessed with making, just kill lists. And it's like, well, you can't table me fast enough. You can't get enough points from tabling me. Like, there was a point where you need to do objectives to win. There was a point where we were playing a mission. It's one of my favorite missions. It's where you basically you pump oil from an oil platform. And this guy was so obsessed with killing an enemy's unit that he literally almost lost himself a game he was winning, because rather than put a ship on the oil platform, he wanted to put this ship from reserve across the table to kill some completely irrelevant unit that had nothing to do with the mission. And he eventually recognized, oh, I've got to score. So he won his game, but he was so obsessed with just killing ships because we didn't play with objectives that he couldn't understand that he was going to lose. Yeah, he would have killed that ship, but he'd have lost by a lot of points if he didn't do that. So I think this is very important, and I really, really suggest you do it. It's not too complicated, and if you follow what I'm kind of telling you, you can use your frigates and your light cruisers to try and maneuver, and use your heavy cruisers and your battleship, maybe to defend or to strike the enemy. It'll help you out. It'll make things simple, and I've found that every time I've done this, it's been a good game, and the points are generally pretty even. Just try not to abuse this. Like, if you've got some named fucking battleship or some really powerful battleship, maybe take one that's closer in power to your opponents if you find it's dominating the table. The point's to learn, not to win at this point. All right, negative play experiences. Awesome. SRS, that was the big one from when we started. I had a friend, he wasn't even heavily stacking SRS. He could get 20 SRS tokens. And he just dropped them on his enemy ship. And there was like nothing the enemy could do. The enemy actually had very good air defense and very good flak. And his own ships defending himself. And still got just completely wrecked. It is so hard, or at least it was so hard, to remove SRS without magnetic generators, that the amount that was left just devastated his ship. There's just nothing he could do. It was bad. It was bad. In fact, I started thinking the only way you could play the game was just to almost to swap queens. Take a super carrier of your own, kill his carrier. He's killing your carrier first round. And that's the game. And that's when we got people suggesting, oh, I'm just going to take 4 super carriers with a single support ship each. You know? Um, so the thing with SRS is to help, if you're worried about this or this happens in your game group, just bring a couple of monitors with magnetic generators. Then they can't super stack them because the more SRS on a ship, the more the magnetic generators are going to hurt them. Next thing, always keep in mind SRS go at the very, very, very end of the turn. You get to do a lot before those SRS actually go off. Um, Two, ask yourself if the SRS can really kill your ship. There's a good chance you'll see a giant stack of SRS and they should only be able to cripple it with 60 hits. Now, granted, they probably will kill the ship, but you never know. But build your list accordingly. Make sure you don't have one thing that's just gonna do the magic, right? But like I say, if you know that SRS is becoming a problem in your group, just bring a couple of monitors with magnetic generators. It's not a big unit. It's not a big point investment. You should be fine. Or even put a magnetic generator on the likely targets for a shit ton of SRS. Okay, keeping ships in a unit too close. So this is a freaking nightmare in this game. So generally speaking, you're going to use templates. Even if you use a tape measure to move forward, you're going to want a template for turning. And you need about an inch or more on the left side and right side of your ship for these templates to move. And what you do is you just have to remove and replace for if you need to get the template in there. Well, the problem is it's the classic scatter die problem, right? The opponent's ship is facing slightly right, which is a very bad place to be, and he's probably going to collide, or he's not going to go the right way he wants to go, or he's going to have to take a turn or some shit like that. He removes the ship to let another ship move, right? He puts it back. Now suddenly, mysteriously, it's accidentally pointing slightly left. you know? Did you take a photo of it? No. He probably didn't even do it on purpose, but now all of a sudden you're like, okay, dude, you're basically cheating. It's a very reasonable accident. It probably wasn't intentional, but now it's kind of creating a problem. So and it's better practice. Just keep your ships a bit separated. Um, just keep them a bit separated. Keep them at max range. It's just better for ship formations anyway. Don't pile them up. You're just gonna get killed by a blast anyway. Number two, or three. This is actually a huge problem. This is a problem with the game. I don't really have good advice. Moving mass one ships. If you've got a unit of 8 Shanghai with a turn limit of 8, and they're actually doing, like S turns through islands and stuff, that shit takes a long time for them to move. The only thing I could say is if they're in kind of a formation and it doesn't have that big an effect on the game, man, just let them play a little loose with it. You know what I mean? Just maybe do one ship and then put the rest close to formation or something like that. Just play it a little loose. That's the only suggestion I have because they should be going through an extremely complicated move for every ship and potentially having to remove and replace ships to get the templates in. I got no solution for this. It's just a problem. Like I say, maybe play it a little loose, but when it's important and their moves are actually really important, and sometimes they really are, they just got to move it out. Blasts. This is something that can upset you if you have your ships too close. You might say blasts are too powerful, or blasts are upsetting, or oh my god, I had these 8 Shanghai, and now I've only got 3 Shanghai, right? Um, just first off, ask your opponent if they've got blasts. This isn't a hidden information game. You can ask them. Uh, shouldn't be in the first place because you can see their ships. It shouldn't be your fault if you don't happen to know their orbat left and right. Just ask them, do you have any blast? If they say yes, then try to make sure that you're not going to get caught up in that blast. And if they do, then just make sure that you space your ships out so they're not going to get a lot of multiple ships in each blast. Faction rules you don't really understand but are extremely important. Mark of Yama. So alchemical for Empire and Mark of Yama I have found can be somewhat complicated and very confusing, and they're very important to the way that the Empire plays. Alchemical, it's like if you get explosive hits equal to the mass of the ship, you get a hazard marker on it. If it already has a hazard marker, it gets an extra hazard marker and a free crit roll. Amazing, right? Um, sometimes people forget the crit roll, though. And then Mark of Yama is, and please don't quote me on this, I'm not an Empire player, but if I recall, if the unit has a crit roll already on it, and you're at closing range, then you get a free crit roll or something like that. I don't remember. You're alchemical, I think. It just makes you alchemical. I don't know. It's bullshit. I hate it. Um, but I've seen a lot of Empire players forget these rules, and they're very strong rules, and they do a lot for them, and they're paying points for them. So they can get very frustrated sometimes when it's the end of the game, and they're like, "Oh, your ship should have died in a fire 3 rounds ago," which is true. And then also remember, if you pick up a faction and you look at the Orbat and they have a rule you just can't stand that most of the ships have, maybe consider another faction because you're paying points for that rule, whether you recognize it or not. Like, my Union ships pay for contra-rotation. They pay for tactical cavitation. They pay for flash lamps. If I don't use those rules or if I don't like them and I refuse to use them, I'm paying extra. I'm paying extra for my ships. And that's just not a very good way to play. I'll have a miserable time. I'll wonder why everybody's got more points than me essentially on the table and why they've got all these amazingly cool rules and why I don't even have spam to beat them. It's because I'm not using the stuff I'm paying for. You're slower than you think. That's a negative play experience I've seen a lot is people don't understand how slow they are. Pre-measure. Pre-measure, 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 pre-measure. When you learn the game very well, when you get a good mental image of it in your mind and you can just imagine where your ship's going to go, okay, don't worry about pre-measuring. It'll be a lot faster. If you need to, use a dice or a marker to show the rough position of where the ship's going to be. One of the things that I do just for a real quick pre-measure is I think to myself, okay, my Yorktown can move about 10 inches. I want to get the enemy in point blank range, which is 10 inches. So I'll just take a tape measure out to 20 inches and see if the enemy's within 20 inches of my Yorktown. Yeah, I know I've got some turning and stuff to do, but generally speaking, that's a very quick way to know if I'm going to get in point blank or not. So pre-measure. This is another negative play experience. It's actually the opposite of a normal negative play experience. Is your Death Star not blowing up a planet, right? You built this fucking shitty Death Star and you're expecting to be, the villain of the game group, and it just falls flat. Maybe it kills a cruiser or two. And people just laugh at you and they go score on the rest of the table because basically your entire fleet is now concentrated in one little corner, and everything's out of range and it's not fast enough to catch anything. So I say just tone it down. Go for crippling ships. Ask yourself, how much does it take to cripple a cruiser? Can these guys cripple a squad of 3 cruisers? If the answer is yes, that's a nasty fucking unit. It really, really is, because that crippled squad is not going to be as combat effective as a normal one. It can still do stuff, but they've got crippled stats and they've got crippled weapon values. That's bad for them, and it should be easy to finish off that unit in the next turn. If you could cripple them in one round, you can kill them the second. So like I say, when you're trying to build your nasty units, go for cripples if you can. And then the last one that we were able to figure out is great models that don't really work. The Empire has these awesome ass flying dragons, Draconic Colossus. They fucking suck. Um, they're extraordinarily weak. I think they've got like a citadel of 7 or 8, maybe. Like, you're used to it being an armor value, it's a citadel value. Extraordinarily low HP. Extraordinarily short range guns. And your flyer, they can skim, so it's possible to hide them. But I've never seen them do anything ever, even when they come in from reserves. And this is another thing is kind of with the Death Star thing. Advice: if you know your player, your opponent is taking strategic reserves and they're guaranteed to come in turn 2 with an entire battle fleet worth of units, don't deploy on the edges. Don't sit on the edges unless you have to. Maybe put a junk unit on an edge, and then make sure that if he comes in on an edge, you've got some kind of counter strike that's going to wreck his day. But be careful about that. And I find Draconic Colossus, if even when they come in on an edge, they don't have it. So that's the negative play experiences I've found. I find that they're not that bad, frankly. Most of them have a solution. The only one that I think doesn't have a solution is moving a lot of mass ones. You just got to get used to it. You know what I mean? You just got to learn to move fast. Okay, so this is just at-home improvements. This is just some stuff that I think would improve the game, and I'm going to show some photos after this. Facing template. If you can make a facing template or you can buy a facing template, do it. It is very, very helpful. If you can make a blast with a center point, very, very helpful. Because the blast marker needs to be centered on the model it's hitting. The current blast template they have is just an open circle with like these little hooks on the outside that kind of represent the 4 corners. You can't tell where the center actually is, and it's just kind of unfair, right? I think it's unfair for your opponent because it's too easy to just shift the template over a little bit and it looks like it's centered, but it's not, and get an extra ship in. And it's kind of unfair for the person using the blast if, in response to that, suddenly you just start like being real strict about where the center of it is, and it's, you know what I mean. Strict is in suddenly we've got like a quarter, like the size of a quarter has to be the middle because it's impossible to pinpoint. So now it's even less flexibility. Terrain, you need more terrain. So I've got a picture of the Archipelago set. I was going to use it to talk about SRS, but the Archipelago set, the terrain is tiny, tiny, tiny. It is not really usable on its own. The best application I've ever seen of it is to put it on bases with just other handcrafted terrain. I tend to cluster the archipelago islands together to make decent sized islands, but they're just too small to be used. And then this is another thing, test fit your models before you glue them. I wouldn't even glue a part of the model together because the directions for these models are not very good. The assembly guides for your miniatures are not very good. Test fit everything. If you follow the assembly guides, sometimes it's impossible. Legit, it's impossible. And sometimes it just doesn't you actually will screw up joints because something you already glued cannot be fit to another thing unless it's not glued. It's a pain. Just test fit everything for real. Okay, so let's move on to some pictures. So on the left, you see a Fleshhound of Corn. When I first started this game, we just downloaded the Orbats, downloaded the rules, and we played with cavalry bases from Warhammer. There are several different sized bases. You see that this Fleshhound is too small to be a cruiser, but he's close enough. You can tell what direction he's facing, and there's different size bases, so you can kind of tell roughly what size the ship is. You're not going to get the full experience, but if you just want to try the game and see if you enjoy it, I found this to be very effective. We played a few games like this, and we were hooked. Then on the right side, you see my typical setup. I am very lucky in my house. I've got a 4x8 island, or I think it's 4x7 actually. So I just have a game mat that is not a full table of terrain. It's just some terrain I threw on there as an example. You'll see I've got a felt pad. There's something called dangerous water in this game. It's basically difficult terrain. I use felt pads to represent my difficult terrain. I like it because ships are meant to drive over it. And it's very clear, when your ship hits that felt pad, and if he's driving over it, it's very easy to just place the miniature on that felt pad. So I like it. And that's actually, Warhammer Islands for Dreadfleet. But like I say, I do have the Archipelago. That's just the first thing I grabbed. I also usually will have a TV stand near my gaming surface for other materials. So you see I've got the rule book and a printed Orbat there. And that's normally the way I like to do it. An extra table. Even if you're at a game store, if you can find a way to make an extra surface, just put your gaming case down on a chair and put that next to you. Very, very helpful. It's better than putting it directly on the table. That can tend to be a problem. That's another disadvantage to this game. It is a full-sized war game, 4x6. That is a very hard thing to accommodate outside of a hobby store. If you are in a hobby store, I'm excellent. You'll find more people to play with in the first place. If not, you are going to have a hard time finding a 4x6 table. They're very, very expensive when you can find them. It's just a pain. I was very, very lucky. We did not know this island was this size when we moved, but when we found out that it was this size, it was amazing. And then Warhammer and Age of Sigmar reduced their table size, and then we could play games on our kitchen table, which was nice. But fortunately, I do have the capacity to play with this large of a table. And then small games are on a 4x4. That's still a pain in the ass. It is because normally it's not hard to find a 6-foot table. It is a damn difficult time finding a 4-foot wide table. So let's go ahead and move on. Now this is a like a facing template I bought off Etsy. Someone please make these fucking things, seriously. So I had to pay $30 for mine. And I'm in a position where I can spend that money, but your average player can't, and I think you really want one. You can see that it has rings to help you center your ships. It shows you where the center point of your ship actually is, and then it shows you very clearly where your firing arcs are. Very, very helpful. I love this tool. I just want somebody to make them for cheaper. I'm even considering creating a design and having a friend cut them for me on his Glowforge. Okay, so this is invaluable. You might not see what I have. It's an Army Painter rangefinder. It's a kind of laser that puts a line on your play area. And as you can see, this is why you need it. So on the left-hand picture, we're trying to figure out if that Yorktown, or that Intrepid, I mean, can hit. There, just at the very top of the screen, you'll see the butt of a little frigate. He can't, right? You would think he could see, but he can't. Actually, you see the laser runs over the very edge of the island on the top. They could hit, but in game they can't. And you see something similar. Unfortunately, I cropped this picture badly, but there's a battleship trying to shoot at the Enterprise. And I'm afraid I'm still in the middle of painting this stuff, but he's actually out of line of sight. I mean, technically, it looks like maybe he's touching the very tip of the front, and in that case, he can still hit the Enterprise and get obscured. But he's pretty much out. So that's kind of my suggestions. Is you can proxy this at home pretty easily with bases. You can even cut out pieces of paper. You can use my comparison of a Mass 2 ship to a this Age of Sigmar base to give you an idea of how big these ships are. And maybe if you cut them out of paper or something like that, you can, or even cardboard, you could write the guns and the facings down on it as well. And that would be a pretty nice solution to try out the game. Or try out some of the ships that you like. Like I say, I would figure out how to get one of these templates. I'd figure out how to get a blast template with a hole in the middle or a dot. And absolutely, absolutely, I would get a laser. It will help you so much with line of sight and firing arcs. Okay, and we're getting to the end here. I just wanted to make a note about Wild West Exodus. So it's the same universe as Dystopian Wars. If your faction is represented in Wild West Exodus, check it out. Check it out. You can see the type of people you have on the ground in this world, and I actually find it's very very exciting. So first off, there's something that the Union and the Confederates get called pacifier assault or terminator assault. And you have essentially a Talon autogyro. It's kind of like an Osprey or like a VTOL that can land on a ship, and they drop off these guys. Well, it doesn't even say. It just says it's a pacifier assault or a terminator assault. I didn't know what the hell it was. I kind of thought they were just unloading robots or something. But it's a very, very vicious assault. It's a very brutal assault on a ship, and generally those sailors just get wrecked. And I checked out Wild West Exodus, so this guy is a Union pacifier, and this guy is a Confederate Terminator. So these are the guys that get dropped off on the ships. It finally makes sense why those sailors just get ruined. I mean, look at their basically heavy infantry with two fully automated machine guns, right? That's it makes sense why they deal so much damage to the ship. And these guys are the Sultanate. Some of their ships belong to the Order. And one of the things about the Order is they've got the Cor Coralie or something like that. And they're kind of like suits of armor with a spirit animating them. And that's what these guys are. And you'll notice they have certain ships that have a Cor Coralie bonus. And just seeing them and being able to read their background, I think it adds to how cool this stuff could be. So that's the end. I'm just going to do a few final thoughts while we look at this black screen. It's not often I find a war game I really like. I've been kind of, when I was younger, I used to play a lot of different war games. And then what I found is you can collect a lot of war games. You're not going to play a lot of war games. That's the reality, right? Everywhere I've been in the world, and I've been all over the globe, I can find somebody to play 40K with me. I have miniatures that I bought when I was 12 years old. 40K miniatures, Chaos Space Marines. I, I don't really play Chaos Space Marines these days when I play 40K, but if I did, I still field my ancient Chaos Space Marines. I've got a lot of the new models too, but I still field them. So if you're, a limited means wargamer, it's better just to play 40K. Eventually, the models you buy, they're essentially going to be good forever. You might run into an edition where you can't play them, but guess what? 3, 4 years down the road, they'll probably be able to hit the table again. So I got hardcore against collecting a lot of different games because, I collected a lot of Confrontation and Ragnarok, um, some other sci-fi games, Eldorado, some other skirmish games. And guess what? I couldn't even find people to play that stuff with me when it was new, right? Um, you go to one store, everybody's playing Flames of War. You move over a city, nobody's heard of Flames of War. Nobody wants to play it. It's just that's the nature of things. Um, so it usually takes something real special for me to get into a game. It has to be a fun playing game, usually less of a simulation. It has to play in a decent amount of time. I have to get into the lore. Um, and it can't be too vulnerable because I like to play relatively competitively. I like to try. It's most enjoyable to me in a war game where I have a tough decision to make and there's risk involved either way, and I gamble one way and it either works out or it doesn't. I love to do that, and you don't get those kind of moments unless you're playing competitively. So I hate games that are too fragile to play competitively. And very sadly, that is almost every Warlord game I have ever played. Beyond the Gates of Antares, Warlords of Erehorn, which is Warlords of Nowhere. Um, Cruel Seas, very fragile system. Very, very fragile system. Too easy to break. Necromunda, right? The 5-point Escher Last Gun Girl kills the entire fucking game. Right? If you're not running 5-point Escher Last Gun Girls, you just buy. What are you doing? The same thing with, unfortunately, BattleTech. I really like BattleTech, but the game falls apart if people know the system and they know how to play. Um, that's why almost everybody says I only play Succession Wars, because if you're playing Succession Wars and you don't have a Comstar player, everybody's kind of on an even ground. Until the Comstar player shows up. Comstar was like the clans for Succession Wars, and then clans were the clans for Succession Wars. And I play in Ill Clan now because everybody's kind of caught up to each other technology-wise. But like I say, I'm rambling. So this game, I got interested in the lore, I got interested in the world. I was able to connect with the faction, the Union. And this is another thing, I liked all the factions. I wanted to play almost everybody. And I just had to be content with picking my faction and saying, I'm just going to make a comprehensive collection for this faction. And I'll just get to enjoy seeing the other factions when I play against them. That's the problem I had in Age of Sigmar, which is I love Age of Sigmar. I don't really like the latest edition. I don't find it to be as fun, but second edition Age of Sigmar was excellent. And this game, it's not a very vulnerable system so far, and the developers are actively trying to patch huge vulnerabilities. Like, I almost quit, actually. I almost quit the game when I saw SRS, how they played, and actually really sad because I was so excited about this game. I was just like, it's just going to be an SRS shit fest. Um, but then we started playing with more objectives, and then magnetic generators came out, and then I was like, oh, eventually everybody's going to get these magnetic generators, and that'll screw anybody that's trying to play pure SRS. I believe it does. I've had magnetic generators used on me. They've wrecked big SRS stacks. You don't expect to lose that much SRS ever. Um, so, like I say, I'm happy with the game. As far as proliferation, it's not there yet. Most people haven't heard of Dystopia Wars. It doesn't have a freaking thread on TG. Most of the communities are pretty slow, but I'm hoping that if we make more content for it and we just get out and play more, it'll start to catch on. I have a big advantage. My wife is a wargamer, um, and I enjoy playing games with her for the most part. Uh, so if I get a comprehensive army for me and a comprehensive army for her, well, guess what? Even if War Cradle goes out of business tomorrow, I still get to play the game forever. So that's kind of my safety net there. But like I say, I'm happy with the game. It took a lot for me to get into another game, and I found I haven't regretted it with Dystopia Wars. I'm really excited for a lot of the stuff they have on the horizon. But if you have watched this video, thank you very much. This is maybe the third thing I've ever recorded. Um, I'm gonna try and start streaming games and making more content for wargaming, but probably primarily Dystopia Wars for a while. That's what I'm most excited about. But this isn't going to be like exclusively Dystopia Wars stuff. Either way, thank you for joining me. I hope this video was helpful. Some of the concepts like the dice math or how to evaluate a ship, that took me a long time to figure out, and I think that could be very helpful to you if you're just getting started in Dystopian Wars. All right, that's it from me.